Okay, good evening. So I know I haven't been giving talks as frequently as before. It's just about the time that I'm spending on finishing up with school. So next month I'll be back more into it, but I'll try and give some talks now. I was requested to give a talk by one of the meditators, so I've been meaning to give a talk anyway. So tonight I thought I would go over dhammanupassana. I was asked about this as well by one of the meditators. The practice of satipatthana, sati means to remember. We translate as mindfulness. But it means to remember the present moment, to remember what's going on in your body, in your mind, in your experience. And so the Buddha talked about 4 ways that we establish mindfulness or sati. Kind of the 4 bases that we use to cultivate sati, to remember ourselves and to remind ourselves of what's happening here and now. The first one, kaya, is the body. So when we walk, we know the feelings of the movement of each foot. When the stomach rises, we know the feeling of the stomach rising. And we feel hardness, softness, heat and cold and all that. Second one is Vedana. Vedana means feelings, but specifically referring to pleasure, pain, calm. The aspect of experience that is felt, how it feels. Does it feel calming or neutral? Does it feel painful or pleasant? And the third, citta. Citta is everything mental besides the feelings. It's thoughts. It's also emotions. States of mind. What state is the mind in? Is the mind angry, or is the mind clinging, or is the mind judging, or is it neutral? Is it fixed and focused, or is it distracted and diffuse? And these 3 make up a pretty good survey of reality. And so when we get to the 4th, it's actually a little bit difficult to explain. The translation that's often given for the 4th one, for Dhamma, is mind objects. Dhammaramana. And I can't help but say, as I've said before, that this is a very bad translation. So First I want to explain what Dhamma means. Dhamma ramana, mind objects. Mind objects is a translation that really only applies to things which are the direct object of consciousness. And by direct I mean something that arises in the mind. An indirect object of consciousness would be something physical. Any of the senses like seeing or hearing or smelling. It's indirect because the mind has to perceive them through the body. You can't see without eyes, you can't hear without ears, you can't smell without a nose. We need these physical faculties, but the mind is also able to experience things directly. Thoughts are the most common Dhamma aramana. Aramana just means object. The mind takes objects. Dhamma here means mind object. That's not what is meant by Dhamma here. So, if you've heard this translation before, I feel comfortable in saying, and I might be wrong, but from the best of my information, it's not the right translation. As Dhamma here is a special category. Some people have suggested we use the translation realities. Dhamma, a very important meaning in Buddhism, is anything that exists. A thing. A Dhamma is a thing or a reality, something that is real. But if you say that, then the first three, body, feelings, mind, these are Dhammas. These are all real, and they make up pretty much all of reality. So Dhamma here, if you look at it, and we'll look at it tonight, it is referring to things that are real, but it's a specific sequence, and there's an agenda behind the Dhammas that are described. They're sets of Dhamma, first of all. There are several sets involved, but they are also progressive. To an extent, they relate to the progress, the path taught by the Buddha. So they are specifically related to the Dhamma, the Buddha Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha. So it's not an easy word to translate it. It seems to mean here, it means something like the realities that relate to or act as teachings. It refers to a progression, mainly. It's like an outline. The fourth one is like an outline of the path. As you're mindful of body, feelings, mind, and the Dhammas, but as you're mindful of these, you will progress, and you will lead, you will follow this sort of roadmap, or you will relate to all these sets in terms of going further along the path. So they're an important part of the practice. I don't talk in detail about them in the booklet on how to meditate, because they're not really, for the most part, all that useful for beginners when you first start meditating. But as you go through the course, you have to learn about these. They're important. So what are the Dhammas? What are the sets of Dhamma that the Buddha taught here? The first one is the one that we do teach to beginners. It's the one that's immediately important. And this is called the Nivarana, the hindrances. So here immediately we see something that is and there's an agenda here. These are on the one hand, practically we're supposed to be noting these objectively like everything else, just as we would stepping right, stepping left. When you're angry, you would note to yourself angry, angry, or when you want something, you say wanting, wanting, and it should be objective. You shouldn't be saying to yourself, this is bad, I'm bad because of these things. But here the Buddha calls them hindrances, again reminding us during our practice that there's a progression. We need to be moving away from these things, and it's also a way to gauge progress. Are you moving away from these things, or are you cultivating anger? Are you cultivating desire? Are you cultivating laziness, distraction? These are a good way to fence yourself in and say, oh well, I'm getting off track this way or this way. And when you get off track, these things will weaken your practice and will slow you down. They are hindrances. They will hinder your progress. So these ones are familiar to the meditator, but most important, really, and important because they're talked about in Citta, in the third one. The mind has all of these in it. But here we see them as a reminder that they are hindrances. And we should take them seriously and keep track of them. It's a good way to troubleshoot your practice. When your practice is not going well, there's really no other way to see it than you have one of these 5 hindrances overwhelming you. Some form of one of these 5 hindrances is what is keeping your practice from progressing. It's often what makes you concerned about your progress as well. Doubt is an important one. Meditators often lose confidence in their practice. So they have doubt about their practice. And if they're the sort of person who is generally inclined to doubt, they'll find it very hard to build confidence even when they experience good results. So good things come, they're quick to forget about them and give rise to more doubting. Greed is another one. The meditator wants to be enlightened, wants to be someone special perhaps, wants to be free from suffering, wants to feel these good feelings that they hear meditators feel. They want to be happy and have peace, and where is it? And all I'm experiencing is stress and suffering. Meditators often are frustrated, bored perhaps, maybe angry about all the bad stuff they have to experience, and so on. So the hindrances are very much tied up with our lack of progress, even our perceived lack of progress. If you feel like you're not progressing quickly enough, you have to pay attention to the desire to progress, because desire, of course, is a hindrance, keeping you from actually progressing. So that's the first set. The second set, the second and the third set really have to be taken together. The second set is the aggregates and the kanda, what we call the 5 kanda. And the 5 aggregates really are the 4 satipatthana. It gets confusing because here we're talking about the same thing we've already talked about. It's basically the same. Right? The 5 aggregates are form, feeling, memory, thoughts, consciousness. Form is body, feelings is feelings, memories and thoughts or judgments or whatever. These are mind, and consciousness is mind. These together make up mind. and the Dhammas, because the hindrances are in the fourth one, and so on. But it's just the Satipatthana under a different name. But they serve a different purpose. The Buddha didn't tell us to practice the five aggregates, right? Satipatthana is practice. The five aggregates here are meant as a theory. And so that we understand that when we're practicing Satipatthana, we're dealing with the arising of the five aggregates. The arising and the ceasing. So the Buddha said to pay attention and see the arising and the ceasing. As you use mindfulness of the body and so on, you're going to see these five arising. In fact, the five aggregates arise at every moment of experience. Now, practically speaking, we're already dealing with them when we practice mindfulness. When we walk, that's body, it's also form, and so on. But the theory is what we come to see from being mindful. As we're mindful, we see the arising and ceasing of the aggregates. And the insight that we gain from the practice is this progressive understanding that that's all there is. There's only physical and mental. The five aggregates are impermanent. They're arising and ceasing. They're unsatisfying. They're uncontrollable. Seeing that pain and so on, pleasure arises and ceases. Thoughts and emotions, all of these things arise and cease. It's important because it does away with so many of our misunderstandings in regards to self, me, and mine. Mind, right? I mean, mind doesn't apply to experiences. Mind can only apply to me, and mind can only apply to things and concepts. As we practice, we come to see through the realm of concepts and possessions and so on, seeing things only as they are. But the five aggregates arise every moment at the six senses, and this is why they kind of go together. Practically speaking, the six senses are something that we teach. They're another part of Dhammas that we do explicitly teach to meditators on the second or third day. When they see something, they should note seeing. Seeing when they hear, they're hearing. Smelling, tasting. When they're eating and they taste the food, they should note tasting, tasting. Feeling something on the body, hot or cold, hard, soft, and so on. And of course thinking, when they're thinking, to say to themselves, thinking, thinking. These are the six senses. But from a theory perspective, they relate directly to this idea that the aggregates, what we call me, a person, a being, even if we're made up of these five, well, those five are only aspects of the experience. When you see something, there's the five aggregates. When you hear something, there's the five aggregates. The physical, there's the feeling, there's the perception or the recognition. You see something and you recognize it, you remember it's like something you saw before. You hear something, hear a sound, that you're able to say, hey, that's a bird or that's a dog. It's because of memory. And then the thoughts, what you think about it or how you judge it, it's good, it's bad, it's me, it's mine. And of course the consciousness, the fact that you're actually aware of the experience. These five aspects, they're like ingredients or characteristics of the experience. And they come and gone. They're only there for the moment of experience. And so from a theory perspective, this is what you're starting to see through the practice. Not only are you being mindful of these things, but you're starting to see the truth that that's all there is. Who I am is just chains and matrices of experience. So this experience is followed by that experience. There's an order to it. We're not just random experience, but we're also not a being or someone who sees and hears. We see that on the level of reality, there's only experiences, and they're momentary. So this all is dealing with the progress, the day-to-day practice that we're undertaking in mindfulness. The next set deals with development. So and one more thing about the six senses is that the six senses are not only taught in terms of arising and ceasing, but there's also the reminder that the six senses are where defilements arise, or where defilements, by defilements we mean things that cause us suffering, that cause stress, or cause us to hurt others. So any kind of fetter, any kind of attachment, something that you get hung up on that causes stress and suffering, it's going to arise at the eye or the ear or the nose or the tongue or the body or the mind. Which means that the means of changing is tied up with our ability to experience and be mindful of our senses. When you say to yourself, seeing, it's not just an exercise in awareness, but it's an exercise in investigation, in coming to understand how clinging arises, why it arises, what are the factors that lead to its arising, and how it doesn't arise when your mind is objective. When you see things clearly, there doesn't arise the clinging, the craving, any kind of getting hung up. But the next set deals with actual progress. It's called the Bojjhangas. No, the Bojjhangas. Bojjhanga means Bodhi Anga. It's two words mashed together. Bodhi means enlightenment. Anga means like a finger, actually. Well, a member. Fingers are called anguli because they're members of the hand. The Bojjhangas are the members or the factors of enlightenment, we call them. And this one has important teaching purposes. So the Bojjhangas, there's 7 of them. But instead of just listing them, I think it's useful to try and depict them, help us see them. Like in the middle you have mindfulness, and then you have 3 on either side. Mindfulness is in the middle. It's in the middle because the Buddha said of all of them, he said, Satincha kohang bhikkhave sabatikang vadami. He explained about the 3 on either side, and I'll explain them, why they're on either side. But then he said, mindfulness is always useful. The other six you have to understand how they arise, how they're cultivated, and how their cultivation works together to lead to enlightenment. It's a description of the progress the skill that you gain from the practice. Because as you practice, you become more skilled at practicing. But more importantly, you become more skilled at managing your mind, managing your experience. So much of the practice is realizing how poorly we manage our experience, how poorly we relate to it, how we're constantly reacting and engaging with experience in ways that increases our stress and suffering. And as we realize this and understand it more clearly, we get better. And these 6 really describe that sort of, well, they describe an aspect of that. Because it's not to say that all 7 of these have to be developed all the time. And it's also not to say that you should actually actively try to develop them. But you have to understand, again, how they arise and how they're cultivated. So the 3 on this side, on the one side, are Dhammavicaya, Viriya, and Piti. Dhammavicaya means investigation of the Dhammas. So here Dhammas really does mean realities, with maybe a specific or a special emphasis on ethical qualities. Kusala Dhamma, Akusala Dhamma, maybe mind states. So as you're mindful, one important quality that comes about is your work as an investigator, kind of like a private eye or a detective, that's the word. You come to be familiar with good and bad states, with all sorts of states, and understanding how they're good for you or how they're bad for you, how they're to your benefit, to your detriment, how they help the mind develop, or how they break it apart, corrupt it. You see how greed, anger, and delusion, all the many kinds of greed and desire, all the many kinds of disliking and frustration and anger and so on, all the many kinds of delusion like conceit and arrogance and condescension and ideology, all this. All these things are how they're destructive, corruptive, harmful. They don't benefit you or anybody else. So this investigation takes place as you're mindful. It's a part of the process of developing wisdom. Virya is the effort involved in this, the energy that comes, the energy that you develop in the practice. And piti is the zeal that you gain from the practice. So these two kind of go together. As you practice, you're going to become more energetic. Practice requires energy, so you train in that as you practice. I mean, part of the training that we give you is to cultivate mental energy. All these exercises that we give you, they're developing that. And the zeal is kind of like the groove that you get into, because piti refers to any kind of state that is repetitive and amplified. There are many states that you can get into in the practice that we call rapture, piti, where you're shaking or so on. They're not a bad thing, those ones, but they're not exactly what is meant here. And they can be distracting, and they can even be problematic if you get caught up in them. But no, what is meant here is getting caught up in the practice, getting caught up in being mindful. As you're mindful more and more, you get caught up in it. It becomes kind of effortless as you get in your groove. And that's, I think, what is meant by piti. These three are, you might say, the active qualities. Maybe even you call them the positive ones, in the sense of adding something to the mind. Positive not in a judgmental way, like these are the good ones. No, they're all good. But positive in the sense of a plus, an addition. The other three are kind of negative. Negative not in a bad way, but negative in the sense of reducing and taking away. And you see how why they have to balance. So the other three are passaddhi, samadhi, and upekkha. So passaddhi is tranquility, a quality of the practice, a quality of progress in the practice, is your mind starts to quiet down. Now, it may not seem like that all the time, and certainly in the beginning your mind is more likely yelling at you, "What are you doing to me?" as you force it through this exercise and this training in objectivity. But as you settle down, and once you come to near the end of the course, you really start to feel the tranquility. Your mind starts to quiet down as you become more accustomed to objectivity, and the benefits come as you stop judging everything and reacting to everything. Your mind quiets down as a result. Samadhi comes, very much in line with tranquility. But samadhi it's translated often as concentration, but you might say focus is another good one. The mind becomes much more focused. And even when your mind is not tranquil, you start to see how focused it is, how your mind is focused on experiences just as they are. Now you're able to catch things like a camera that's in focus. Now you're able to see things so much more clearly than before. Seeing is seeing, hearing is hearing, smelling is smelling. You catch the experience and see it as it is. And the third one, upekkha, means equanimity, the mind that is not judgmental. Really, it is in a way the most important one, but it has to relate to the others. So upekkha means the removing or reduction, again, of your judgments. Right? These go together. As you focus on things, there's less judgment. As you see things more clearly, focused on them, there's no room for judgment. There's no reason for judgment. Experiences just are what they are. And so these three, the reductive ones, and the others are the additive ones. And so at times you can have too much, or at times, at various times, one side is going to help you more than the other. If you're very distracted and very restless, the one side isn't going to help you so much. Right? And if you're very tired or sluggish, this side isn't going to help you very much. But again, it's not about adding these ones when you don't have enough, or using these ones to take away when you have too much. It's about understanding how they work together. The Buddha, in the Satipatthana Sutta, he doesn't talk about this balance. This he talks about elsewhere. So it's important. But it's also important to understand, in the context of practice, the one you need is sati. Mindfulness is the one that is going to balance these out. And what's important to understand here is how these work together. Again, I said this already, but I'll say it again. How they work together, how they synthesize. You have to understand this. Not intellectually, but through the practice. It's not... The problem I want to avoid is meditators starting to worry about these and say, oh, I haven't been thinking about these. Should I think about these? How much should I think about these? And that's not the way at all. It's a description of the practice. It's a description of progress. And when you learn about these things, when you know about these things, it allows you to pinpoint problems, which again allows for further mindfulness, allows you to be more clearly aware of things. As you can see, I'm sluggish, or I'm distracted, I'm lacking in some of these or in some of these. Allows you to more clearly see the roadmap, right? And more clearly direct yourself and navigate. It informs your mindfulness, or it allows your mindfulness to improve. So these are the 7 bojjhangas. Most importantly, we understand that they are what constitutes progress. Without these, you can't become enlightened. And the final set of dhammas that we deal with in the Satipatthana, in the practice of mindfulness, is the Four Noble Truths. No teaching could really be complete without, no Buddhist teaching could really be complete without a description of the Four Noble Truths, so it's fitting that they come at the very end of the sutta. The Four Noble Truths are, well, there's a lot that can be said. A whole talk could be given about them. We shouldn't dismiss them as basic Buddhist practice, but we also shouldn't complicate them over much. From a practical perspective, we're always practicing the Four Noble Truths as we meditate. The first one is the one that we practice mostly, is understanding about suffering. So Buddhist practice can be described as confronting and facing the whole cycle of suffering, what causes the suffering, what we do based on the suffering, and the suffering itself. That's really the whole basis of Buddhist practice, and part of the theory is that we're constantly avoiding suffering. We do anything we can to avoid having to deal with our problems, including trying to fix them. What does it mean to fix your problems? It means to avoid the problem itself. Oh, no, anything, get rid of it. The problem is a problem, right? As long as we see problems as problems, we got a problem, because we're never going to understand them. We're never going to face them. Buddhism is kind of like playing chicken. You know, that game of chicken where you face them down until they blink. Having a stare down. the Buddhist theory is that that's how enlightenment comes about, not from fixing your problems or changing them, but by studying them and learning about them. The idea of fixing things is not a part of it. Part of it is accepting how broken everything is. Maybe not accepting, but understanding. So in practice, you see things, you see how suffering works, and so you let go of those things that are causing you suffering. There's so much of our reality that we think is satisfying us. Yeah, if I do things like this, it's going to satisfy me. Maybe I'm ambitious, that will satisfy. That'll make me happy. Maybe if I get really angry at this person, that'll make me happy. That'll solve things. And so on. These subconscious ideas or habitual ideas that being arrogant or conceited is somehow, if I brag about myself, if all these people know what a great person I am, that'll make me happy. Bragging. Feeling good about yourself, or maybe even low self-esteem, beating yourself up. Yes, we don't say it like that, but we kind of feel it. If I chastise myself, that's the right thing to do. Even humility. You see some people who are actively humble because they think it makes them look good. Right? Well, subconsciously anyway, What a good Buddhist I am because I'm so humble. It's a problem. All these things we think going to make us happy, when we're mindful, we see through that. They're not going to make me happy, and so we let go of them. We stop doing that. When we let go, we're free. When we're free, we know we're free. It's basically the Four Noble Truths. That's practically speaking, but theory is, there's one other important point, is that as we practice, we come closer to the pinnacle, which is the real realization of the Four Noble Truths. So that the path to enlightenment is divided into two parts. What we're practicing every day is called Pubbanga Magga, the preliminary path. It's not actually the path. Because technically the path is that moment, right? The definition of path is something that leads to something, right? Path, well, in this context anyway, a path is not just a path in the forest. But by path here we mean a thing that leads to something. And so technically speaking, there's only one thing that leads to the goal. And it's the moment when all this practice comes together, all the factors of enlightenment and all your qualities and your faculties of mind, when they all come together in that one moment, and you actually see suffering, you actually face reality and say to yourself, not really say to yourself, but realize in that instant, this is not worth holding on to. This is not happiness, not peace. This is garbage, this is refuse. Kind of losing your desire and your attachment. So how it comes about is you're practicing and you're cultivating these awareness, these understandings of things. Oh, this is not satisfying, that is not satisfying. Clinging to this is not good, that is not good. Until it all comes together in one moment where it just rushes to the mind and there's an experience that nothing, it's not something you think, or it's not a thought, it's not a sentence that comes to your mind, but it's this visceral feeling, nothing is worth clinging to. Literally nothing is worth it. Nothing is good. Nothing is going to make me happy. It just comes from realizing that the whole process of clinging, this whole framework, paradigm, right? The way we interact with things, the way we relate to things. We relate to things, if I do this, if I get this, if I have this, I will be happy. It will lead me to peace, to happiness, to freedom from suffering. Getting something. And so we're constantly relating to our experiences in terms of things, and things that I can get that will make me happy or free me from suffering. And constantly we're realizing through the practice how wrong that is, until finally, again and again and again, and then it comes together and there's this moment where the mind lets go. So it's this, the build-up to that is similar. There's moments of, we're constantly seeing that things are unsatisfying and more clearly. But the moment of realization, this perfect clarity comes, where the mind lets go. And so we talk about nibbana, or if you've heard of nibbana or nirvana, that's what that's dealing with. The true cessation of suffering. And so you can see how, practically speaking, this group is different. It makes a good topic for a Dhammatalk. But it's different than the other three. Our base practice should really focus on the other three. The fourth one explicitly talks about the hindrances and the senses, so those are very good objects. They're an important part. But the fourth group also has this aspect of leading us onward, and it's important from that perspective as well. So we understand that it deals with the process and progress, and it involves the qualities that we develop to gain this progress. And you can see how it's an important part of the practice of Satipatthana. So that's the Dhamma talk for tonight. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully that managed to get on the internet as well. So there's people waiting patiently. Hopefully they actually heard some of that. So I'll try to give, maybe I'll take this as a start now that I've got the computer going, and try and give talks regularly. We'll see how regularly. I can answer questions, maybe. I have a list of questions. I'll pick questions that are useful for meditators, and try to make them useful for you here practicing. Anyway, that's all for tonight. Maybe come back tomorrow. Maybe there'll be one tomorrow at 9. Maybe not. Have a good night, everyone.